The government is introducing a Help to Save scheme in which low-paid workers can receive a bonus of up to £1,200 if they're able to save £50 a month. Well, let's develop more on that story, shall we? David Cameron wants to encourage more low earners to put money aside by offering them a 50% bonus on savings of up to £50 a month. Over 4 years, the scheme could be worth £1,200 to savers, but they do have to save for that entire time. Will it work? Let's debate it. We're joined from Westminster by Philippa Stroud, who's Director of the Centre for Social Justice, and from Lancaster by Geraint Johns. He's a Professor of Economics at Lancaster University. First of all, Professor, let's start with you. Can the government afford to offer this scheme?
Well, the government's offering this scheme with a figure of £70 million attached to it to run over the first 2 years. And that suggests that it doesn't expect a huge take-up of the scheme. We've got around 3.5 million people who would be entitled to take advantage of the scheme, and as you say, over 4 years they would be able to benefit from the scheme to the tune of around £1,200 each, or for the first 2 years to the tune of £600 each. And that suggests that only around 3% of those that are eligible for the scheme will actually take it up.
Philippa Stroud, how many people do you think have got £50 each month lying around doing nothing?
Well, what's really interesting about this is that it is for those up to £50. But as we know, most of the individuals who are on low incomes, this is for people on tax credits or universal credits, will not have up to £50 a month to put to one side. So actually, this can be incentivising many households to put £1 aside, £5 aside, £10 aside. All of this is useful in changing the savings culture in Britain.
But is it not the case that if you've got any money left over and you have any kind of credit, particularly credit cards, you should pay off that debt first before putting it into this savings scheme?
Absolutely, but we're not talking about people here paying off debt. This is for people who have probably already done that. This is for people who are in a position to be able to put those small amounts of money to one side. What we do know is that 4 in 10 adults in Britain do not have savings of more than £500. They're not in a position to protect themselves against if a washing machine goes bust, or even to save towards Christmas. We have to do something about this savings culture, and this is a first step towards making that happen.
But Professor Johns, credit's cheap. Money's never been cheaper. Why do we have to worry about saving?
And this will make it cheaper still, in the sense that it gives, in effect, a very good interest rate for people who are eligible for the scheme to save. So that does, as Philippa says, provide them with a good incentive to do so. One thing that's very interesting about this is that it's not entirely new, and so we do know something about how it will operate. The last Labour government was proposing to introduce something called a savings gateway that worked in very much the same way as this, and it did pilot that, and so we've got quite a lot of information about how people will actually respond to the scheme once it is in place. Now, one of the dangers with this kind of scheme is that there'll be some dead weight there, that the government will be paying people to save when they would have saved in any case. And indeed, with the pilots that we saw in the last decade, around 2/3 of the people that engaged with this were already saving. But nevertheless, the vast majority of the saving, around 88% of it, was new saving. So the scheme does promise to be quite effective in that respect.
Philippa Stroud, there's more than a whiff of politics here, aren't there? We're in budget week. This Chancellor's particularly well known for having a grid of announcements which he puts out in the press in the days leading up to Budget Day.
Yes, but I think that what this budget is doing is putting into the forecast the announcements that were made by the Prime Minister in his all-out assault on poverty speech. So a couple of months ago, he actually said that this was something that he wanted to do, and the budget is now bringing forward the actual substance of what he's doing. What we're waiting to see is the mechanism that will deliver this. One of our recommendations has been that actually they use auto-enrolment to deliver this, because then we know that it will automatically go into a savings account.
The savings culture you alluded to earlier is difficult, isn't it, when the return is so small? With interest rates being at these record low levels, it means trying to persuade people to put money aside for a rainy day is very difficult.
Which is why this scheme is so good, because even if you're putting £1 aside or £50 aside, if you do that for 2 years, you get a 50% bonus on top of that. If you do that for 4 years, you get a large amount of money. So this is really incentivising low-income families. It's only available to people on tax credits or on universal credit, which makes it particularly targeted at those who are earning but on low earnings.
Professor Johns, the law of unintended consequences can often come into schemes such as this, but are you telling us, because you've spotted the similarity to Labour's scheme, which I think this Chancellor dropped, didn't he? They've probably managed to eliminate any of the possibilities that people for whom it's not intended piling in?
So the devil is often in the detail, and we'll have to wait to see till tomorrow to see exactly what the scheme will look like. But certainly there's a lot there from which we can learn, and what we do know about the scheme that Labour was going to put in place is that it was going to effectively get rid of most of the deadweight that's always associated with this kind of scheme. So the signs are very good.
The poverty, those who work around poverty have been very critical of this, if I can return to you, Philippa Stroud, again, in the sense they're saying it is so out of touch with the reality. There are whole groups of families or family units up and down the country who are having to decide, shall we have the heating on for a while or shall we eat? And if that's a reality for some families, this idea of putting £50 a month away, and you have to keep doing it for 2 or 4 years, is a nonsense, isn't it?
I think when I first heard that it was £50, I was looking at those on tax credits and universal credit and thinking that's going to be really challenging. But then when I looked at the detail of it and I saw that it was up to £50, so you can put £1 aside, you can put £2 aside. This is really important. If people get the savings habit, even when they're on very, very low incomes, we know that it protects them. A washing machine, about the cheapest washing machine that you can buy in the UK, costs £150. We know that people need to be saving for Christmas, even when they're on low incomes. This is a vehicle that would help them to do that.
Geraint Johns and Philippa Stroud, thank you both very much indeed.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Martin.
The Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump, has described his rallies as love fests, saying the violence at some of his recent events is inconsequential. He was speaking at a campaign event in Hickory in North Carolina.
We have tremendous rallies, sometimes 25, 30,000. We had one 2 weeks ago in Alabama. No disruption, no nothing. But the press is now calling this saying, oh, but there's such violence. No violence. No, you know how many people